This edition of MacVoices is supported by Zapier. Connect your apps and automate your workflows. Zapier is the easiest way to automate your work. For a 14-day free trial before the end of this month, visit zapier.com/MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Linode, your solution when you need a virtual server in the cloud. Use the code MacVoices to take $20 off your first purchase at linode.com/MacVoices. Welcome back to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we haven't talked Take Control for quite some time, it seems, and we're going to fix that right now by talking to Mr. Joe Kissell. Joe,
Hello.
It's good to see you. Great to have you.
It's nice to be here. I will apologize in advance. Let's say I donated 25% of my voice to charity. Is that a good story? I don't know. I have a cold, so my voice might cut in and out a little bit, but hopefully I will still be relatively intelligible.
Never heard anybody donate their voice to charity. That's an interesting idea.
You know, it's one of those things like, how did you get that scar? You want to come up with a more interesting story than what really happened, which is you walked into a window or something. Oh, well, I was in a knife fight. You should have seen the other guy.
Yeah. All right. So we're just going to leave that there. I don't want to know anymore.
By the way, I have a scar up now. Never mind.
Yeah. This time, though, we're going to talk about a book that's been around for a while and has just gotten a revision. This is Take Control of the Mac Command Line with Terminal.
That's right. This book was first published in 2009, which in computer years is like, computer years are like dog years, So that was a really, really long time ago. And, I sort of, one of the stances I've taken on the terminal app and the command line throughout the history of this book is, it's sort of eternal, right? It doesn't change that much. The command line is the command line. And yet, this book was 4 years out of date and really, really needed an update. And as I was digging into it, I'm like, yeah, a lot of this stuff is eternal, but man, so much has changed. So this is a big update. And I love this book. I had fun writing it. It was one of those books, like some books are just like a grind to get through. This one, I kept adding pages, and I'm like, I need to stop. I could go on for hundreds of pages. I got to stop at some point. So I just had to make myself stop. But it was fun to write. And I think it's going to be very useful. I mean, I've gotten great feedback on the previous editions. People really enjoy this book, find it a very helpful, gentle introduction to the command line, and I hope it's very useful too.
Well, you took my first comment or thought or question, however I was going to do it, right out from under me. That I think a lot of us perceive the terminal and the command lines and the command codes and all that to be something that doesn't evolve. That those are the underpinnings of the OS, and most of us work with the graphical user interface on top of it. And of course, that can change radically and seems to on a pretty regular basis. But the command line, what changes down there, Joe?
Well, you'd be quite surprised. So let's start. I thought, I was going to have like a page on what changed in Catalina. And so I wrote my page and I'm like, oh, right. There's also this. Oh, right. There's also that thing. Oh, I totally forgot about this. So I had many pages on what has changed. So few things. The one thing that I should get out of the way, first of all, which has been talked about the most, but is actually the least interesting, is that in Catalina, Apple changed the default shell. Now, a shell is the program that runs when you open up Terminal. When you're typing commands on the command line, the shell is the program that listens to those commands and then spits out information. The shell is a program. The shell is also, in some sense, a programming language. And for quite a few years, the default shell has been a shell called Bash. Now, all macOS ships with, depending on which version you have, up to 6 or 7 different shells. And Bash is a very common shell. It's a very popular shell. Sort of the original shell was called the C shell, but it you know, let's back up. There was the shell, like there's a shell called SH. People who write shells like to have sort of funny names for them. So there's a C shell, CSH. There's Bash is the born again shell because the creator was named Born, and there are lots of different, like there's a shell not included with macOS, but there's a shell called the fish shell, and a lot of these shells have names that are puns or plays on words or something. There's actually a new shell added in Catalina called Dash. Dash has been around a long time, but it's new to macOS and Catalina. But anyway, Z shell, not to be confused with C shell, but it's Z shell, or ZSH, as I usually refer to it in the book, has been part of macOS for years and years and years and years. And so if it was 10 years ago and you wanted to use Z shell, you could, no problem. And even today, if you want to use Bash, that's no problem. But the one thing that did change in Catalina is that Apple changed the default. So now the default has changed from Bash to ZSH. And so if you have a brand new Mac or a brand new user account, Z shell is going to be what runs. Now, I saw a lot of articles in the days before Catalina shipped and while Catalina was in beta, just saying, oh no, this is going to change everything. It's going to break everything. Your scripts aren't going to work anymore. Now, nobody can use Bash anymore. Everybody has to learn Z shell. It's just the, shell apocalypse or whatever. And they're all wrong. So that's why I say this is the least interesting thing. The default shell changed, but kind of so what? Because number one, Bash and Z shell are very, very similar to each other. For probably 90% of users, 90% of the time, they won't even notice any difference at all. Well, maybe, just tiny cosmetic things. But everything is going to still work the same way. The commands that they're used to in Bash will still work in Z shell. Secondly, as I said, Z shell has been around forever. So for all I know, you might have already been using Z shell as your default. That was possible before, and you can still use Bash. Bash is still there. Bash still works. All of your scripts that use Bash still work. You don't have to modify anything. There's no problem. It's just the default. If you don't like the default, you change the default. And almost all of the knowledge that you had, if you already knew Bash, still applies to Z shell. There are a few cool new features that now you can take advantage of if you want to. You could have taken advantage of those 10 years ago, but now, that's the default. But basically, it was hyped up as this big story, and it's kind of a non-story. Z shell is nice. It's fine. If you want to use that, great. If you don't want to use it, also great. My book now covers both. And the story for again, 90% of it is the same. And then where the two differ, I call those up. So that's item one. And again, it's kind of sounds like it should be more interesting than it is, but it's really not a big deal.
Well,
but go ahead.
Let me just jump in there because I that was a great little explanation of shells and the explanation of what is a Bash script or what is a C shell script or whatever. I mean that gives you a frame of reference, I guess. And these are things that are built into the operating system that most people will never see unless they dig around in the terminal and in the command line, or unless they buy your book.
Right. So couple other things in Catalina that do make a difference. We've already discussed previously that in Catalina, there's not just one startup volume, there's two. And this is all hidden from the user. You will still see, Macintosh HD or whatever you've called your startup drive. But behind the scenes, there are two. There's Macintosh HD, which is a read-only volume. It has the core elements of macOS on it. You can't change them no matter what. Not if you use that special sudo user command in terminal, and not if you use any kind of magic. Like you can't change that stuff. It is read-only, and that's for your protection. That's so that malware that might appear on your Mac and not get caught by Apple's mechanisms or some third-party tool can't fundamentally corrupt the core of your Mac. So that's good. Now there's a second volume like Macintosh HD-Data, and that's where all of your actual user-loaded stuff lives. All of your applications, your documents, and so forth. Now to you in the Finder, it looks like it's just one volume. Apple does some magic behind the scenes to sort of merge, there's really 2 applications folders and 2 library folders and so forth, but they use some magic to merge those. Except when you're on the command line. Sometimes you have to go specifically to one of those places or another to do something. And so that makes things a little bit trickier in Catalina. And so I explain that. Next change is also, it's sort of not news, but it's closer to being news. And that is that in Catalina, Apple has deprecated scripting languages on the command line. These are things like Perl and Python and Ruby. So these scripting languages have been included with macOS since a very long time ago. So if you want to download some software, either whether it's a command line app or not, that is based on Ruby or Perl or Python, you just download it, and for the most part, it works. So Apple has said, yes, those are still here. We have, we're shipping older versions of them. But one of the things we're saying now is that this is going to be the last version of macOS that includes these programming languages, these scripting languages. So in the fall, when macOS 10.16 comes out, those languages won't be there. And so again, there was a lot of press that was sort of like, oh no, terrible. This is, everything's going to break. And a little bit, but not so much, because you can still download these languages yourself for free and install them. It takes like 30 seconds and then you're good. Then everything works again. And for that matter, a lot of people have been doing this anyway, because the versions of these scripting languages that Apple has included for years and years have been old ones. Apple has not come anywhere close to keeping up with the revisions to these languages. So a lot of people that wanted newer modern features downloaded them and installed them themselves anyway. So that doesn't change. So it's a little bit of news, but it's not much news. I talk about some other things, like a couple of programs that used to always be included, like command line programs like Telnet and FTP are no longer included with macOS. Again, not a big deal. You can download those programs or alternatives if you need them. There is this thing, Catalina has all these alerts that pop up all the time. You got to have permission for this and permission for that. Permission, it's all stuff in the privacy and security pane of system preferences, security and privacy. I never remember which one's which, but there are all these different categories in there, like automation and full disk access and so forth. You have to give different apps permission to do certain things so that malware isn't doing this stuff without your knowledge. So in Catalina, there are more of these kinds of activities that you might do on the command line that you have to manually give permission for. You have to say, terminal has my permission to access these files, and terminal has permission to do a screenshot or whatever. So it's a little bit of a hassle, but you do it once and then it remembers it and it's done. But so none of these things are really problematic, but they are things that you do need to be aware of. And I was really quite surprised at how many of them there were.
Okay, so go back to the languages for just a second. Mm-hmm. Is there any particular reason that these are being deprecated at this point? Is this more of the move to, I'll get an email for this, but the consumerization of macOS?
I have told many people for many years that if you ask me any question about Apple that begins with the word why, I can only say, I don't know what Apple is thinking. I have some guesses, some theories, and some things that I have read that other people have proposed as why this might be happening. One of the elements that is certainly involved in some way is testing. Now, Apple has very rightfully gotten a lot of flack about Catalina being quite buggy. And when any new version of any software ships, of course, Apple is going to do some testing. We hope it's enough. It usually isn't. But they have to test a million different things on a million different configurations of Macs. And the more time goes on, the more gigantic this testing matrix becomes. It takes a long, long time to test stuff and make sure it isn't broken. So having fewer things built in means less stuff that Apple has to test and make sure it hasn't broken anything. I would like to think optimistically that means they'll use their testing time to get rid of other bugs. So maybe that's a positive thing. It could be that they have, Apple is a gigantic company, but they have a limited number of programmers. And it could be that they would like those programmers to be doing other things like, adding new features, fixing other bugs. It is also the case, however, that there are licensing issues. So I don't know specifically what the story is for those three scripting languages, but I did hear about that in relationship to Bash. There were things about the license that Bash is released under that Apple finds less agreeable than the license that Z Shell is released under. So it could be that they, just in terms, it might be a matter of cost, or it might be a matter of legalities. But Apple, for some reason involving licensing, finds it more palatable to omit things that, the licensing causes them one kind of problem or another. Now, again, these are my guesses. These are things that other people have proposed. They might be only partially correct, or they might be totally off base. I don't really know. All I know is I'm not really losing any sleep over them. I do use programs. I use programs all the time that rely on Perl and Ruby, and occasionally ones that rely on Python. And so that means I have to spend 3 minutes installing some new software when 10.16 comes out. Okay.
So they're not including them any longer, but they will still run just fine.
Right. And I should say, I said sort of glibly, I just download them. In fact, that might not even be necessary, because Apple is encouraging developers whose software depends on these scripting languages to bundle runtime versions of those languages with their own software. So it could be that it's next, September, October, and you download the newest version of some app that relies on Perl, and it just includes Perl bundled inside it. Now, that's a bit of a can of worms, because now that developer end up having 5 different versions of Perl installed, or different versions with different features enabled, or dependencies, or plugin modules, or what have you. So it could get a little messy if you do that, but it is one way that you can solve the problem too.
Zapier, the easiest way to automate your business tasks, is sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. When you're running your own business, your to-do list is never ending. You know you could automate many of the tasks you do, but you don't know how. That's where Zapier comes in. Zapier connects and moves information between your web apps so you don't have to. Just pick your apps from the list of over 1,500 apps that Zapier works with. Just a few clicks and Zapier will take information from Gmail and move it to your CRM, or to a spreadsheet, or to wherever you want it to go. And not just any information or all the information, but the information you decide you want to capture. No code, no programming, just a few minutes of clicks and your first Zap is on the job. The more I look at Zapier, the more things I find I can automate to make my life easier. And who deserves an easier life than you? More than 4.5 million people are saving an average of 40 hours per month by using Zapier. I sure can use that 40 hours, and I bet you can too. So go to our special link at zapier.com/MacVoices through the end of the month to get a 14-day free trial. That's zapier.com/MacVoices for 14 days of simple, powerful business automation. Zapier.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Zapier for their support of MacVoices.
Another thing I wanted to ask you, because you sort of went not by it, but yeah, I guess you went by it. Are any of these changes, do they give you more power within the command line and terminal over the security features? Do they bypass them in any way, or do they enhance them in any way?
Well, to the extent that various things you do in terminal require your explicit permission, that does make you somewhat more secure. So it's not just that the terminal app as the terminal app needs permission, but particular programs you run inside the terminal app might ask for permission to do certain things. So in that respect, it is a bit more secure, but I can't offhand think of any ways in which these changes give you more control or more power in terms of privacy and security. I mean, they give you some nice convenience features, but the changes aren't quite in that area.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that seems to be such a big topic right now, is security and privacy, that we have to address it no matter what we're doing.
Oh, yes. So. And you and I will be talking about that again in the coming months.
Okay. There's a hint. There's a hint. Joe, I always ask this question. It seems like so many times when you write a book that's a little bit techy, a little bit geeky, potentially. Who is this book for? Should it be for someone who is a total, complete novice, or someone who is intrigued by what you can do in the terminal?
Yeah.
Where do you start on this book?
This is not a book for computer geeks. This is not a book for programmers. I think people who already have a lot of experience using the command line would say, well, he just barely skims the surface. It's 200 and some pages long, but I mean, he didn't talk about this and this and this and this and this. Yeah. Right, I don't. I mean, okay, you can download the official documentation for Z Shell. The PDF is over 500 pages long. So, I mean, and, I cover tons of stuff in the book that isn't even part of that. So my point is not to give you like geek level documentation on all this stuff. This book, like all my books, is written for the layperson. So I often say, I think about my mom when I'm writing a book. And honestly, okay, this particular book isn't for mom. You have to have, I think a little more technical curiosity, let's say, than my mom probably does. But those of us who, we're just using our Mac and we're like, hey, I don't like the way it does this. I wonder if it can do that. Is there a way to change this so that it does this other thing? Is there a way I could automate something or adjust something? We'll do a web search and the pages will come up and say, well, you go into terminal and you enter defaults, right? Blah, 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 blah. And, for a person who has never worked in the command line environment before, that can just look like, it can look like Greek, but also it can look really scary. Like I feel like I'm doing, brain surgery here in the innards of my Mac, and I don't have any, friendly icons or menus to guide me or keep me from making mistakes. I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't know how to fix something if I do something wrong. I don't know how to keep myself out of trouble. So people like that, people who just want to kind of make little modifications to their Mac, but feel a little bit scared, timid. This is a great book for those kinds of people. It's also a great book for people who like to tinker, but want a little bit of, hand holding, a little assurance, from an expert, like just do this and you're not going to break anything. So in the last chapter of the book, I have tons and tons of recipes. And I spend most of the book teaching you how stuff works and how you do things. The last part of the book is just, now, if you want to get this result, go in here and just type what I say. Just literally type what's on the screen. You can copy it from the book and paste it in. Then you get this result. And so that's sort of one of the ways in which I ease you in and just say, okay, you might not know about everything having to do with cooking, but if you can follow the directions on the box, you can successfully make this dish. So I think that the quintessential buyer for this book is someone who has curiosity about the command line. They know little or nothing about it, but they're interested. They would like to learn. They're a little bit apprehensive, and they want that expert guidance and handholding. So even if you have never opened the terminal app in your life, you can start with this book, and it will take you through everything step by step by step by step. It's not going to teach you everything about the command line. It's going to teach you enough to be, hopefully I get you beyond enough to be dangerous, get you over here to enough to be safe. I want you to learn enough to be safe, to be able to do some really useful things, and also to be able to interpret or evaluate stuff that you find on random websites, figure out what these things mean, what they're actually doing, how to use them, and maybe you encounter something that's like, oh, well, I found this thing on the web and it tells me almost exactly what I want to do, but not exactly. I wonder if I could just modify it a little bit to do something different that is closer to what I want. That's the sort of thing my book can help you with, is understanding what those differences are and how to exploit them.
This MacVoices is sponsored by Linode, your solution for when you need a virtual server in the cloud. Need a virtual cloud server like now? Linode has you covered. You can deploy a new server customized to your purpose with the features you want in seconds. Time is money, and if you have that immediate need, Linode is there. And even if you don't need your new server that quickly, Linode is there. And these aren't just any servers. These are SSD-based 40 gigabit network, high-performance processor-powered servers that are capable of web hosting, distributed applications, hosted servers, and more. Pick from a simple $5 per month Linode plan, or ramp the whole way up to a high-powered dedicated CPU. When you need to upgrade as your requirements demand, that upgrade is a click away. To make some deployments even easier, there's a host of one-click installs available, from Minecraft to WordPress. Need to locate your server in a particular location for either performance or legal reasons? No problem. Linode has servers all over the world. Perhaps most important, though, is their pricing. No surprises, no hidden costs. You pay for what you need, and you pay for what you use on an hourly basis. No data transfer fees like some of the larger cloud services. It's your data. Why would you expect to pay to access it? With Linode, you don't. These are just a few of the features that Linode brings to the table. I want you to visit linode.com/MacVoices right now and see what all the fuss is about. Again, linode.com/MacVoices takes $20 off your first server package. You've been thinking about that virtual server of your own for a long time. Make it happen today with Linode. Thanks to Linode for their support of MacVoices.
Okay, two other things there. You said, and I want to make sure that we all understand. You said enough to be dangerous, because we often tell Mac folks that short of emptying the trash, there's very little you can do to your Mac that you can't undo. That's not the case in the terminal, though. You can if you don't pay attention, can do some damage.
So yeah, all right. So yes-ish, you can do real damage on the command line. For example, the old sudo rm-rf / like if you type that stuff in, everything on your disk will be deleted. You really don't want to do that. So yeah, you can do real damage. Now, with Catalina, Apple has made some changes that protect you from yourself. So now if you did that command in Catalina, yes, you could erase a lot of user installed stuff. You wouldn't actually erase macOS itself, because that's on that read-only volume, right? So Apple has now, that's not true if you're using an older version of macOS, but at least in Catalina, Apple has protected the core of macOS itself, the built-in apps, and all the parts of the kernel, all that stuff, so that you can't damage it, you can't change it, you can't erase it. The worst you could do is erase stuff that you've put on there. That could still be bad, and of course, I recommend great backups. But Apple is trying to protect us from ourselves. That said, as long as you're reasonably careful and reasonably attentive, you're very unlikely to do that sort of damage. I start by just saying, all right, here's a chapter where we're not going to change anything. We're just going to look around. We're going to change directories. We're going to list what files are there, find out what their permissions are, stuff like that. We're just going to look around and we're going to get really, really comfortable moving around, looking around, not touching anything, not changing anything. Then we're going to make some really, really tiny changes. Let's just make a little file and put some stuff in that file and change it around a little bit. And so I really try hard to ease readers through it so that they are taking baby steps and getting comfortable as they go and noticing where that boundary is between this might really cause damage and I can safely play with that.
Well, and I don't want to scare anybody. That's not the point. The point is that you do have to pay a little bit of attention here. But my favorite example always is, that every day we wave 4 spikes right in front of our face and put them in our face, and it's called a fork. And if you did that with anything else other than a fork, if you picked up a switchblade and tried to eat with a switchblade, you'd be very, very careful. But you've got all that muscle memory going for you with a fork. You never hurt yourself. And so the thing here is, when you're new to this stuff, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful, like you would be with a switchblade. But sooner or later, you're going to get as comfortable as you are with a fork. It's
right.
Not the best analogy, but I think it gets the point across.
That's okay. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Joe, I want to go back to the recipes.
Yeah.
Give us a little idea of what you can do in the command line that you tell us how to do that we couldn't accomplish easy in the Finder or
sure.
in any other utilities.
Sure. Well, I should say, because you brought this up, there are utilities out there whose purpose is to modify a lot of these preferences that Apple has hidden. And so a lot of the things that I talk about, you probably could find in some utility someplace, apps like Onyx, for example. I mean, they're great. They give you a little checkbox that will change a lot of settings for you. So there are some of the recipes that are the command line version of stuff that you might find in a utility someplace. But there are also a lot of things in here that are different. So an example of something that might kind of straddle that border is if you use iTunes in Mojave or earlier, or music in Catalina, you might notice that by default you get you can have 0 stars, 1 through 5 stars. But some of us have really strong opinions about this is a little better than a 4-star rating, but it's not quite a 5-star rating. So it's possible to turn on half-star ratings. So you can rate a track in music 3.5 stars, 4.5 stars, half a star. So I like doing that. That fits with the way I think about things. So it's a really easy command. And I'm sure there's some utility out there that will do that for you. Also, you can do it yourself without any utility at all on the command line. I talk about, I should say, by the way, I have these recipes. I don't know the number of them offhand. It's dozens and dozens of them. But I went through and I deleted, I think 6 of them that don't work reliably with Mojave or Catalina because I want everything in here to be as universal as possible. But then I added 13 new ones. So we still have a net gain of like 7. All right. Graphics. So you can open Preview or even just use Quick Look in the Finder to, rotate an image, let's say. Or you can resize it or save it in a different format. What if, you're designing a web page and you need all of your images to be a certain, they all need to be 300 by 400 pixels or whatever. They all need to be some specific dimension. Maybe you need them just to be resized up or down. Maybe you need to be cropped. Maybe you need to rotate a whole folder full of images, or maybe you need to do a whole bunch of these things. You need them all to be rotated counterclockwise by 90 degrees and cropped this way and resized that way. Well, there's a tool that ships with your Mac called SIPS for simple image processing software, maybe. But it's a tool on the command line to manipulate graphics, and it can do things like cropping and rotating and resizing. So I give you a lot of examples of, okay, crop this image to these dimensions. Type in the command just as I have it in the book, and you're done. Or resize or rotate or whatever. So it's the kind of thing that you can do manually in an app like Preview. It's not that you can't do it, but if you need to do it on a whole bunch of files, or if you need to automate it, like I want to have a script that will do this for me over and over and again, 100 times, then you need a command line tool, and that's something I tell you how to do. I talk about things like disk utility. All right, disk utility, you can mount, unmount, repair disks, repartition, disk first aid, all those kinds of things. Well, that's true. You can do all that. There's also a command line version of disk utility called diskutil, and diskutil can do all the things that the regular version of disk utility can do, and other stuff too. And as with SIPS, not only can it do other fancy things, but it can also be scripted if you choose to do that. So I talk about that. I also have like some little fun things in there. This is something that a lot of people need to do, and I couldn't believe that I didn't include this previously. But you know how your user library folder is hidden? It used to be there, and then back in like Lion or something, Apple started hiding it. Well, there are many ways to unhide it. I tell you about one of them in the book. That way you can work with that folder in the Finder, which I often need to do. There's this sort of web app thing called Cheat Sheet. It's cheat.sh or cht.sh. That it's this really cool idea. There's a website called Stack Overflow, and it's basically a discussion site where programmers ask questions of each other and try to get solutions to their programming problems. I go there all the time. It's terrific. So Cheat Sheet lets you put in a little query, like, how do I do a while loop in Z Shell? And it'll just spit out the first answer that Stack Overflow comes up with when you feed it that search. So you can do all this on the command line, and to show you how. Like, you're programming along. It doesn't matter, you're using PHP, you're using Swift, you're using Objective-C, you're using Perl, whatever. You just type in a quick little command, and the first answer for Stack Overflow will show up right there in terminal for you. So as you're making a script or trying to do some command, you don't quite understand how the command works, you get an answer right there in terminal. So there are, many of these. Some of them are just like one-liners, just you type this and it's done. Some of them are, there are 10 different ways to use this. Here's some examples. Some of them are, open a text editor, paste this in, save it as a script, and now you have a program that you can run as often as you like to do stuff. So there are just lots and lots of these.
And that's a great short list, just to give folks an idea, because I think there is this perception that the things you're doing in the terminal and on the command line are deep and dark and very geeky. And you gave us some great examples there of things that I might want to do that a normal person might want to do, and this just is another way. Sorry, normal person. I don't even know what that means, but you get the idea.
I am not one of them, so I wouldn't know.
Well, I don't think that too many people are, but I think there are people that they want to poke around in that underbelly of the OS. They just need a guide to do it.
Yeah. So I've had in the last 4 years quite a few requests from readers. Oh, you gotta cover this, you gotta cover that, you gotta add a recipe for this, that, and the other thing. And I've added as many of those as I reasonably can. There are some things that people request, and I'm like, really? You want me? It would take 5 pages to cover this, and only 3 people in the world really care. So sorry. Or if something just was either too obscure or too complicated, and I didn't think it would appeal to a lot of readers, I had to let it go. But I did add a lot of things that various people requested. Now I should say, I've had quite a few people say, "Oh, Terminal sucks. Terminal's a dumb program. There are much better apps out there that you can use to access the Mac command line, like iTerm." And there are a whole bunch of them. And to those people, I want to say, that's true. Other programs exist, and they have better features than Terminal. And if you want to use them, you have my blessing. You can still use almost everything in this book with another app. But this is a book about Terminal. It's right there in the title. And if I'm going to write about every app, then I have to add, 10 pages for every app, and then it just goes on forever. So this is a book about Terminal. If you want to use another command line, another Terminal emulator, that's terrific, and more power to you. Same thing with a few people asked for more information on the Fish Shell. Fish Shell is really cool, has a lot of great features. It's neat, it's friendly, it's funny. But I wanted to focus on the things that every Mac user can do with the built-in shells, especially those that either were or are the default. And I decided that was a can of worms. Wait a minute, fish like worms. But anyway, I felt like that was opening up, like making the book really enormous for a fairly niche audience. So sorry, I've mentioned these things in the book. I haven't gone into much detail. But again, the audience for this is not command line experts. The audience is novices with little or no experience, want to learn more, want to do cool stuff on your Mac, want to get a little taste of maybe command line scripting, or maybe you read my book on automating your Mac, take control of automating your Mac, and I mention command line scripting in there. Don't go into a lot of detail, and I say, and if you want to learn about that's another method of automating your Mac. Well, get this book. So now here's the other book, and it's freshly updated.
We could go on and on, but I think that hopefully folks have gotten the idea about what this is about, because there's specific examples I'd love to ask you about, but we'll save that for another time. But the book is out now, of course. And what kind of pricing is there for this book? And are there any bundles that tie in with other Take Control titles?
So the book is $14.99, as most of our books are. And remember, it's like 46-ish pages long than the previous edition. But the price hasn't gone up. Actually, the price went down by a penny. So we feel like we're giving you a lot for your money. If you have either the first or second edition already, you can upgrade for $7.50, half price. So we really we want to make this as affordable as possible, and we think it's a really fantastic value. Now we are recording this slightly before the release of the book. Once you see this, the book is out. As we're recording it, it isn't yet. And I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do with bundles. Obviously, I just mentioned the Automating Your Mac book, and it is a very natural combination with that book. I suspect we will continue to have a bundle of those two books at a reduced price, but I don't know exactly what that price will be at the moment. And we have been having some discussions here internally about bundles generally, because so many of our books do make sense in combination with various other books. And the more different bundles we get, the more complicated it is for everybody. But what we do have always is a build your own bundle discount. So if you decide you want 3 or more of our books, whether they happen to naturally go together or not, as long as they are, you're ordering full price books, you're not ordering upgrades or something, put any 3 or more full price books in your shopping cart, and we automatically take 30% off of that. So yes, we do sometimes go beyond that to have special 2-book bundles or bundles of 3 or more books where you can save more than 30%. But we have the build your own bundle deal so that it's just simpler for everybody, and you can save quite a bit of money on any 3 or more books.
Perfect. And of course, we're talking about takecontrolbooks.com is where you
yes, we are
to get all this great stuff. Joe, thank you. As always, you talk about the book, but you also enlighten us along the way, and that is always a good thing.
That's what I like to do.
Yeah, and I presume we'll be talking again about more things that more enlightenment.
I keep glancing this way because over there that you can't see is a big whiteboard that has upcoming releases on it, and boy, there's a lot of them on there. And interestingly, a lot of them have something or other to do with privacy or security. So we'll be talking again real soon.
All right, sounds good. Well, I hope your voices, you and your voice, are better next time.
Thank you very much. I hope so too.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. TakeControlBooks.com is where you go to get this particular book, along with all the other Take Control books by Joe and all the other Take Control authors. Go check them out. You will not be disappointed. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.